Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Tonight, Pakistan's renewed anti-terror operations and border tensions, from the recent heavy clashes at Chaman to successful counter-terror missions in Tang and Lakki Marwat. Pakistan's armed forces have once again demonstrated precision, speed and resolve. We'll be talking about these operations and of course the kind of resolve that we've seen, the Prime Minister also, and what he said as far as Pakistan's armed forces and their precision and efficacy is concerned with regard to particularly to these terror operations. A little later on, we'll also be talking about the security, humanitarian and regional implications of these developments and Afghan Taliban failures to continue to fuel instability, while international concerns grow over their oppression of women and especially girls and education. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Sardar Masood Khan, who's a former ambassador, and a little later on, we'll also be joined by other guests in the program. Sardar Sahab, thank you for being with us today. How do you assess Pakistan's diplomatic handling of the Chaman Spin Buldak clashes in light of Afghanistan's repeated border provocations?
Well, I think it's a big success, and an attack, a vicious attack, has been repulsed. And the message is very clear that there would be zero tolerance for this kind of attack on Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I think that once again, our armed forces, our security forces, our intelligence forces, and also our civilians have demonstrated coordination. And that's how we were able to respond effectively and in a very timely manner. So, and the message from the political leadership is very clear to Afghanistan, to Afghan Taliban, that we want peaceful neighborhood, but it would not be at the expense of our own security.
When we look at, of course, the repeated provocation, when we look at what's happening from the Afghanistan side, of course, we've been speaking to you for a while in terms of the delusional space that the Afghan Taliban seem to exist in the background of how the world views how they're treating women, children, and of course, the kind of security risk that Afghanistan has now become. Do you see them, do you expect them to sort of assess this realistic evaluation of what's happening within their own territory?
Well, I think they are delusional, you've rightly put it. Because, well, they're disconnected from their own population and they're not representing the aspirations of the majority of their population. And they've also chosen to become a proxy of India. Now, they were not getting any recognition from the rest of the world. Pakistan was trying to rehabilitate them into the international system, and it made a series of attempts. But this onslaught of terrorism from Afghanistan has really damaged them, and it has damaged Pakistan. And they are undermining any likelihood of cooperation or collaboration between Pakistan, geared towards regional cooperation and combined efforts to develop the economies of the two countries. So Pakistan wants regulated borders. They defy it. Pakistan wants it inside their territory. The victim is Pakistan. So, and there are dissenting voices, not only in Afghanistan, but from the diaspora, that this kind of system, this despotic system, cannot continue to tyrannize the people of Afghanistan, and now they're tyrannizing and victimizing the people of Pakistan.
So that's when we look, in your experience, when we look at what's transpired between us and the Afghan Taliban in the wake of the talks also, we saw the attempts of mediation also. How are you now looking at things? Of course, the ceasefire not holding because, of course, of these the spate of attacks that relentlessly continue, the skirmishes, which, invariably make the Afghan Taliban lose and look bad, but nevertheless, they are happening from their side. To what and how do you see the future between Afghan Taliban and Pakistan, our relationship, so to speak?
Well, our relationship has been ruined, as a matter of fact, and Afghan Taliban are responsible for that because Pakistan had acted in good faith throughout. Going back to the talks, the three rounds of talks that were held, first in Doha, and that was a good engagement between the two countries, and some positive statements were made by both sides. We were supposed to build on that momentum in Istanbul, but in Istanbul, the conduct of the Afghan delegation was despicable. They, instead of developing that roadmap, which had been outlined in Qatar, they started scuttling it. And so then they have now resorted to open warfare against Pakistan. And this is hurting them more than it is hurting Pakistan, although it is hurting Pakistan grievously too. And they are not independent actors. I mean, of course, I mean, they are not monitoring the activities of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan safe havens are there, and these are not ungoverned spaces. They are under the jurisdiction of the Afghan government. The Afghan government has absolute writ over the territories where Taliban safe havens are. Tehrik-e-Taliban safe havens are. But I said that it's not an independent actor because it's also being prompt and primed by India to attack Pakistan. And it is Afghanistan has become India's proxy, and it is using India's ire and anger against Pakistan after its humiliating defeat in May 2025 during that war, where Pakistan established its superiority even in the conventional realm. So that's the kind of predicament that we are facing. Here is Pakistan, which aspires to have very cordial and friendly relations with the Afghan people because we have a centuries old relationship, we are intertwined. We have relationship of kinship because on both sides of the border, brothers and sisters are living. And on the other hand, there's a regime which is determined to pit the people of Afghanistan against the people of Pakistan. And this is acceptable to the majority of the people on both sides.
When we talk about what's happened with regard to our regional counter-terror networks which have been activated, we know that we continue to coordinate with China, Tajikistan, SCO, regional anti-terrorist structure, which is chaired by Pakistan. These mechanisms, of course, address emerging threats from Afghan-based networks. How are you looking at this, these networks, and also, these include incidents that are harming Chinese personnel in the region also. In terms of our looking, accommodating them, looking, sort of even the other way because of the issues of the people of Afghanistan, like you mentioned also, the women, the children, and the innocent civilians. But now, of course, the state of Pakistan has, this is where the buck stops. So now that the ceasefire is not holding, again, what do you see as the future for us and the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, and the security situation?
The situation is very precarious. I mean, in the foreseeable future, we do not see any reconciliation or diplomacy succeeding. But at the same time, they have dehumanized the people of Afghanistan. And the third point that you have raised, this is most sinister part of the Afghan regime's policies, is that they are in fact fueling and nurturing transnational terrorism, because this terrorism is striking Central Asia, also Pakistan, and it threatens ultimately the United States and its allies also in the region, because nobody is safe. And Taliban had promised back in 2020 to the United States of America that it would not allow its territory to be used for terrorism. And similarly, in talks with Pakistan at Doha, they reiterated that promise and made it public. I mean, not just in one-on-one conversation, but publicly they stated that they would not allow Afghan territory to be used for terrorism. But this is precisely what is happening, and it is concerning for Pakistan, of course, but it is concerning for the entire region and entire neighborhood.
But now it seems that, like you said, the spread of it, we know the incident that happened in Germany. We also, of course, the US also, and overall, the world is involved, and we know that there is the aid that invariably comes from the US for the civilians. How do you think, as far as the Afghan Taliban are concerned, are they cognizant of what this is going to do to their own people? And how do they expect to survive? Because, of course, there is that argument that it is a war-ravaged economy, and perhaps, they are used to sustenance in that kind of an environment. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think that over the year, the United States has been channeling humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan through the United Nations, and they have sent in billions of dollars worth of assistance to Afghanistan. This has sustained the Afghan economy, and the Washington officials have had talks with their Taliban counterparts, although they do not recognize the Taliban regime. So this is a very complex web, I would like to say, but this has given the United States, Washington, some clout vis-a-vis Kabul. We used to have that clout with Kabul, but it seems that the Kabul government, whether it is Kabul or Kandahar, they have wasted it completely. But Washington still has modicum of clout with Taliban, and that's why what we're trying to do is to use multiple channels. I mean, first the neighborhood, whether it was China's statesmanship, which it demonstrated by bringing Afghanistan and Pakistan together for economic cooperation. We welcomed it. Afghan Taliban rejected it, but we also involved other countries, Qatar and Turkey. And now, of course, we want the United States to use its influence with the Taliban, formal or informal, to counsel them to put an end to this kind of aggression against Pakistan, because it is nothing short of an act of war against Pakistan. And when they attack us, and these people, they attack us, they slip into the Afghan territory after attacking us, this is war, and we have the right to respond in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. It is not just hot pursuit, it is a danger, a very serious peril that we foresee, and that's why.
Do you see them, when you say that counsel them, are they amenable to that kind of, counseling? Because we are looking at the rejection that we saw, the kind of pot calling the kettle black that happened with regard to the kind of demands that were put forward during the talks that were held in Turkey. And there was this constant blame game that we are even looking at now. When we see the gaslighting happening, them accusing us and claiming that the attacks are not originating from the Afghan soil. When we look at this count of this kind of counter gaslighting that we are looking at, inversion of facts, the kind of changing the reality of what's happening, which is what the Foreign Office has said, which is what the DGISPR also said earlier, then are they going to be amenable to any kind of counseling?
Well, you raised a few points, but let me address them one by one. First is that, yes, they are amenable to counseling, but they would be amenable to counseling from the United States, not from India. India is the absolute obstacle because they're sworn enemies of Pakistan, and they are, as we speak now, they're planning to prepare for another attack. You know, after the defeat in May 2025, they've said they would pause the war, but they can attack Pakistan anytime, and they're making preparations and they're buying arms and ammunition left and right. So this is one aspect, but I think they would be amenable to the suggestions and counseling by some friendly countries if they can get themselves freed from Indian stranglehold. The second point that you have raised is very important. All the claims that they made and those ridiculous statements, they were disingenuous and counterintuitive. They said that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is Pakistan's internal problem. For God's sake, they have their safe havens inside Afghanistan, and they had the protection of the Afghan Taliban. The United Nations Security Council reports substantiate, I mean, they have reported, and this is documented evidence, that some elements from Afghan Taliban have been funding and financing Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and they have also been supplying arms and ammunition to them. So all their claims are not credible at all, and nobody takes them seriously.
We look at, of course, the claims are not credible, but when we look at their ability, when they come to the negotiating table, to, you know, the lack of faith here, you know, that's what I wanted to come to. Do you think that there will be, they will in good faith want to come to some kind of credible agreement with Pakistan if they are coming with so much lack of faith and you know, sincerity to talks, and you know, we know the nexus with India also. So those are you know, considerations for us also, because when we are looking at a neighbor like Afghanistan with so much lack of sincerity and lack of you know, lack of real you know, honesty when they come to the table to come to any kind of agreement.
Well, every war has to end on or around a negotiating table. So I think that they will have to come to a negotiating table. But at the same time, if they are not reasonable, if they maintain their aggressive posture against Pakistan, if they continue to sponsor terrorism against Pakistan, there could be an implosion inside Afghanistan. There's no guarantee that there will be continuity of Afghan Taliban at all, because they're unrepresentative. There's no democratic setup there. And there are forces within Afghanistan which do not accept the legitimacy of Afghan Taliban's government. This we are not saying out of animosity. This we are saying because of the public sentiment that is there inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan amongst diaspora. So what we're saying is that there are 2 or 3 paths available to Afghanistan to talk to us bilaterally and resolve this issue. Second is that to accept the counsel of the mediators, Turkey and Qatar, or China, or Russia, or let's say Saudi Arabia, or United States, and then there's war. And Pakistan has now established that if there's an attack on Pakistani soil, killing our security personnel and civilians, the response would be instantaneous and punitive.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you for your very valuable time. We're going to be moving on to Arshad Yousafzai, who's an Afghan affairs expert. Arshad, we've been talking to Ambassador Sardar Masood Khan also. When we look at what's happened till now, you know, what is concerning, you know, also among other things, is the lack of faith and lack of sincerity we saw exhibited clearly by the Afghan Taliban during the talks. Now we are also looking at, you know, a ceasefire, which is of course not in existence at this time, because we are looking at constant violations from the Afghan side. How do we proceed in this kind of an antagonistic environment?
Well, thank you for having your show. I what the Ambassador Saab said before me, is justified to a greater extent. The thing about Afghan Taliban is they can be stubborn most of the times. They take a lot of time in talking about or resolving small issues, but eventually that is the only way to convince them. Fighting with them over issues, if it is Pakistan, if it was the US or anybody, it is not a solution. I believe that negotiations, mediations, more time should be given to convincing the Afghan Taliban onto coming to terms with Pakistan. Being personally, having experienced meetings and negotiations, mediations, peace processes since 2008 involving the Afghan Taliban and certain European states and later on the United States, I can say for sure that the Taliban can spend or say waste months on a single issue, but eventually the only solution is through talking.
Yousafzai, when have we really seen a solution in talks with the Afghan Taliban? I mean, I understand, of course, that we don't have a choice. They are a neighbor on the other side. They also have that nexus with India. Do you think that the belligerence that we see right now is responsible, the nexus with India and a more recent one that we've seen exposed now, is responsible for this kind of belligerence? And one has to say their inability to see the reality of what's happening in their own land.
Well, I think that India is finding it as an opportunity to destabilize Pakistan or to try and sabotage the relations that we had with the Afghan Taliban or the regime for the past 4.5 or 5 years. And they have got this opportunity because of two reasons. One, our relations, instead of improving them, both sides created trust deficit, and eventually we are now becoming enemies. Secondly, India, when Afghan Taliban came into power, they were kicked out of the country completely. There was no presence of Indians for at least 7 months. And they kept begging different countries, including Iran and Qatar and others, to reconnect them with the Afghan Taliban. Remember, they had at least 14 consulates in Afghanistan, the biggest number in any country we have seen so far here. But then there was no presence because post-Taliban, Indians were not able to find a ground because the Taliban had a sort of trust relation, not completely reliable trust relation, but the relation was good. It was improving because still most of the Taliban leaders, they are the people who have lived here in Pakistan and who still remember the generosity of Pakistan and the support of Pakistan that was given to them or extended to them in 21 years of war. I believe for Pakistan to regain the lost ground and to shunt out any enemies of Pakistan, the way out is through talking. When we talk about when have negotiations or peace processes with the Taliban succeeded, there are many examples. If we take a minor example, in 2014, the Afghan Taliban talked with Americans for exchange of a prisoner, Bobby Bragdell, who was a US Marine, and then the famous exchange of Gitmo 5 took place. That was through negotiations, through talks, that for many years the Americans could not release their prisoner, or so could the Taliban. But when they came to the table, they talked and it happened. Similarly, I was involved in health processes, in civilian casualties and other processes with the Taliban. And a lot of things happened through talks. They do listen to people when you make ground. So I think for Pakistan...
But do they listen to us? Have they listened to us in the past?
They would. They have listened to us in the past, and they would definitely listen to us if we were to involve the right people. And by the right people, again,
the US.
One is Qatar, and then we have Saudi Arabia, not to that extent, but Qatar is a country that the Taliban trust most because that was their second home for many years, that they have provided the Taliban a lot, and Taliban cannot forget that. So Qatar is still very, very influential.
The last talks. What about the talks that we had? What about the talks that we had just now, the more recent ones?
Mahrukh, peace processes they take a lot of time. One round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 1 month, 2 months, it does not work. Look at Americans. They continued fighting. The Taliban were fighting with them. It took 21 years to agree onto something. There were attempts for many years in 2012. Even before that, Pakistan tried to bring them to take talking tables, but it did not happen. And when the Americans they started talking, sessions that would carry on for 12 to 16 hours per day, and it went on for weeks and months, and that's how they reached an agreement. So
To continue, you're saying that effort has to continue relentlessly. Let me come back to you. I'm going to also introduce Dr.Syed, Hussain, Shaheed, Soherwordi, who's a foreign policy expert. Dr. Syed, I don't know if you've been listening to my conversation with Mr. Yousafzai, but he is saying that, of course, like all other complicated peace issues, we must continue talking to the Taliban. And of course, talks have not been ruled out by the Pakistani government at all. But at the same time, when we look at the situation at this time, when a fragile ceasefire continues to be violated, how do you see things?
Thank you so much, first of all. I believe that I have a bit of heard your conversation with Yousafzai. I believe that this is the high time that both countries still work on negotiations. Pakistan and Afghanistan border tension have intensified in the recent months, and that's one of the big reasons that right now we are discussing that. And due to this escalation of this cross-border attacks, resurgence of militant sanctuaries inside Afghanistan, and inability of Afghan interim authorities to act effectively against these groups which are targeting Pakistan, I think that there cannot be a better time than this to negotiate and to speak about it, because these developments have compelled Pakistan to adopt a firmer posture, one that prioritizes the border management, counter terror intelligence, swift military response to any threat emanating from across the border. So Pakistan's renewed this anti-terror resolve. It reflects a national consensus that no military group, ideology, sanctuary, that can be allowed to destabilize the state or harm its citizens. So once this is clear from Pakistani side, there is a dire need from the other side of Afghanistan to speak on the subject and to rein all those groups which are operating in Afghanistan against Pakistan. It has also re-emphasized coordination of civil military efforts, regional diplomacy. Different countries were involved. Just a moment back, you were talking to him regarding friends of Pakistan and Afghanistan, so that ice may be broken between the two, and enhanced internal security mechanism to ensure that terrorism is confronted decisively and without any compromise. So I believe that these things, if are kept into mind, we can really move on with that. Very recently, if you
Soherwordi, when we look at, like you said, the resolve is certainly there. Our armed forces continue to valiantly fight for us. And we know that, like Prime Minister said, there is a single-minded resolve to completely eradicate all forms of terrorism. But the question is that when the Afghan side refuses to acknowledge their own failures, when we look at the terrorism that continues to stem from their side, are we going to be able to have any kind of meaningful talks with such a partner? When we talk about a ceasefire that is violated, when we talk about eradication of terrorism that comes from their side, there are flat-out denials. Do you think that there are going to be viable talks with such a neighbor unless they acknowledge their own failures, which we saw didn't happen in the most recent talks?
First thing first, what is happening right now between Afghanistan and Pakistan is not the first time that has been taking place. There have been numerous instances when America was here in Afghanistan. They did the same thing. They were negotiating at the same time. They were having a robust, hard instrument fight against them. One thing. Second thing, if I give you the example of Red Brigade in Italy, IRA in Britain, like they all had gone for this. And of course, the most important thing in South Asia, other than Afghanistan, is Sri Lankan separatist movement, where LTTE was dealt with an RNN. But at the same time, there were always doors open for negotiations. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there are differences between Pakistan Afghanistan case and the others that I just mentioned. Not only that Pakistan go for a hard line attacks on Afghanistan, but at the same time we must know that there is a huge border of 2600 kilometers between the two countries. Number one, very important factor, we cannot do away with Afghanistan. We must know that Afghanistan is a neighboring country. With normally what we say in English is you can change your friends,
but what is that one factor in your opinion? You know, we're not denouncing any kind of talks with them. Like I said, you know, they are not denounced by the government of Pakistan, by the state of Pakistan. But the question is, what is that one measure, or what is that one thing that you think will make a difference in their approach when they come to the table with Pakistan?
The point is that this kind of complicated situation doesn't have one size fits all. That is not possible. The point that I'm trying to make here is that both approaches must go parallel to each other. We must keep engaging them in negotiations. At the same time, they must know that enough is enough. Pakistan can go for the hot pursuit as Pakistan is doing. And I'm going to give you that example with respect to that strategic level. The Chaman flare up recently that happened day before yesterday and yesterday, that reinforces Pakistan's renewed resolve for a robust anti-terror posture and its strict border security. And that is likely to respond with enhanced intelligence by Pakistan, tighter border control, and a strong civil military coordination to prevent further cross-border infiltrations. And these things will give a very good message to Afghanistan. They have to deal with it, or either they would renege all those terrorist groups which are harbored there in Afghanistan, or they will face the music. So at the same time, the episode should serve a wake-up call for
a hard line. So it is invariably that hard line that will resonate with them and bring them to the table with some semblance of sincerity. Isn't that true? Let me go to Mr. Yousafzai. Mr. Yousafzai, isn't that true? That kind of hard line is perhaps that one measure that will bring them to the table with some semblance of sincerity and faith.
Certainly, I agree with Dr. Soherwordi Saab, and this is a fact that Pakistan, in its due right, has been doing what it needs to do, and it has proven in the past few months time and again to the Afghan regime that we can strike at will wherever we find any terrorist or any targets that we need to destroy. That is one thing, and inside Pakistan, any terrorists, the way they have been eliminated in the recent days, it proves that the will, the resolve is there. Pakistan is not going to back down from its inherited right. Then, comes the point, is it going to press the Taliban? Meaning that, are they going to be pressed by this force? I doubt that, because again, you have to come back to talking table. And to do that, we have proven to them that we can strike, anywhere we want in Afghanistan. I wouldn't name the places, but they know about it as well. They know that we are no more joking around. But it's time to come back to talking table. Like Dr. Saab mentioned, and just from today, we can see an example. In the morning, we heard, or last evening, we heard the Americans saying that they were close to a ceasefire or negotiation, successful talks between Ukraine and Russia. And today, Russia has bombed Ukraine again. So the fighting continues, and so does peace process. And exactly the same thing was done by the Taliban when they were talking to the Americans. And this is what we should be doing, like targeting terrorists here in Pakistan, but then go back to the Taliban regime through our friends directly, if not possible directly, through our friends, and talk to them.
When we look at what happened in the last talks, there were mediators, in good faith, who, of course, pledged their time and effort. Do you see that effort, being repeated in the near future?
I think that is the only way, and Pakistan knows as well that they have the power to convince our friends. They have the right to talk to the right people. It's not just the states. I must mention that there are organizations and people, some of whom I have worked with as well, like, a great name in peace process is Martin Griffiths, who was the former UN Under Secretary General, who has great relations with the Afghan Taliban. He was the first UN person in 1998 to sign an agreement with them. And again, he was the first person to sign an agreement with the Afghan Taliban on 30th of August 2021 with Mullah Baradar. Martin Griffiths is such a person who is trusted both by the Taliban and also Pakistan. We can use such people and such organizations to come and sort out these issues between the two neighbors.
Fair enough. I also want to move on to what's happening with regard to the women, the situation of women, and especially, young girls, education, and what's happening with regard to that. Mr. Dr. Soherwordi, we know that Australia imposes sanctions over Taliban suppression of women and girls. We've also seen sanctions linked to deteriorating human rights situation. If you look at the AFP report, there's also, those officials who've been accused of systematic oppression on women and girls. When we look at that kind of situation, that is, alarming and a cause of concern for the world. And the response that we've seen come from the Afghan Taliban is sadly, dismissive to say the least. How do you look at this situation that has been brewing within Afghanistan for a while?
Well, first thing first, Australia's this move to impose financial sanctions and travel bans on senior Afghan officials, including the Minister and Chief Justice. I believe that this is in fact it gives a signal as a growing willingness amongst Western and like-minded states to move beyond rhetorical condemnation and adopt concrete punitive measures, which till now every country in the world has completely failed. I mean, sanctions framework described by Australia, when I was reading that report as first of its kind for Afghanistan, it also includes arms embargo, cutting off direct military material support to Afghan regime and kind of stuff. So this development strengthens international pressure on Taliban to reconsider its repressive policies, and it signals to other countries as well that engagement with Kabul will carry reputational and legal costs, particularly if human rights abuse continue. So such a shift could deepen Afghanistan's diplomatic isolation, weaken Taliban's leverage, and embolden global efforts to press for political reforms, humanitarian relief, and social justice in Afghanistan. So that there, and for Pakistan, with respect to what you just asked, this hardened international stance against Taliban change, the Taliban changes the regional security equation. Like Pakistan, with share of long border, as just mentioned before, with Afghanistan, and continues to face spillover effects and risk for militant sanctuaries and extremist ideologies. This may interpret the sanctions as both an opportunity and a warning. On one hand, sanctions increase pressure on the Taliban to curb extremist elements, which, if enforced, could reduce threats of cross-border terrorism and ease security burdens for Pakistan. On the other hand, the sanctions may push Taliban further into isolation, intensifying their dependency on non-Western allies or illicit networks.
And Dr. Yousafzai, then what is the solution that the world, what are those measures that the world can take? Of course, the particular concern for their civilians, for their women, for their girls, for their education, for humanitarian, concerns that are being raised by the world don't seem to particularly perturb the Afghan Taliban themselves. And if we don't, in the absence of punitive measures, they don't seem to be really, turning a stare at what's happening in their own territory. So what do you think? You're right. These are measures that can, push them further into isolation. But what are the options open for the world, in your opinion, for those women, for those girls?
I think this is
Question,
something
Dr.
really
Syed?
important that we must realize that when such kind of sanctions are put against, are levied against a country, that country it crumbles down from inside. And Afghanistan at the moment is having some kind of a support from certain countries. I believe that those countries may also be taken into confidence, stating that this is a sheer violation of human rights, children's rights, women rights, and therefore they must cooperate. Once pressures and sanctions are absolute, of course that country succumbs to pressure. In this case, Taliban are not having any such pressure because there are leakages in this kind of in isolation where they are having benefits from somewhere. I believe this Australian model that must be adopted by entire world so that they may understand that this thing is something that is important in international relations. One thing, second very important thing, when
Come from everywhere.
Pakistan, I said that when Pakistan is adopting such a vigilant posture, strengthening its stance is also important because there are certain bad boys which are refuged there, and people are focusing on that. People are not focusing on what the people are passing through miserable time in Afghanistan. That is.
Let me include Arshad Sahab in this also. Arshad Sahab, what Dr. Soherwordi is saying is that people are not focusing on what's happening to the civilians and on the terrorism that comes from the Afghan Taliban. I think you would agree with me that Pakistan as a state has solely been concerned for the women, the children, the civilians of Afghanistan. And like we spoke earlier, we have strong ties across the border. The question is, and for that reason, we have given them a lot of latitude. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Pakistan and every other country that has any respect for human rights is concerned about the state of affairs in Afghanistan regarding women and children, especially girls and girls' education. Coming to the point about education, I know many Afghan Taliban leaders, including Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is the interior minister, who have been advocating for girls' education. They have been trying hard for many years before giving up that girls' education should be allowed in the country. I know many Afghan Taliban who are privately educating their girls in their houses, in their homes. They are paying private teachers to do that. The problem is, it's only a few, and it's a small circle, I would say, a small circle around the Sheikh or the Amir al Mumineen, Habatullah, Sheikh Habatullah in Kandahar and Helmand, who oppose girls' education because, in their view, a woman's life should only remain within the four boundary walls of a house. That's it. There is nothing else for them. That is so unfortunate. But when we come to the resilience of the Afghan Taliban and the efforts that were made in the past, like Soherwordi Saab says that there are countries who are supporting the Taliban, and if sanctions were imposed from different countries or if they were pressed enough, it comes to a joke, but there are countries who are only concerned about their investments and they don't care about the human rights. And so does the Taliban. Sanctions would only hurt Afghans, that is Afghan people. The Taliban don't care about any sanctions. They don't care if Australia allows their people to travel or not. They don't care if arms or ammunition is allowed into the country or not, because it doesn't hurt them. It hurts the people. So, in my opinion,
Solution, in your opinion, something that would make a difference to those women and children?
exactly. In my opinion, I would go back to an effort by Qatar's Education Above All charity that wanted to try a model in 3 provinces, and certain Taliban agreed to it. There were great efforts in doing that, but God knows what happened in midway, probably about the funding or whatever. But the Taliban had agreed in at least 3 provinces to start educating at least 150,000 girls. And just to come to that single point, there was at least 7 months of talks, negotiations, meetings. Some of the meetings were attended by myself as well. So I would say the efforts should continue. If we are pressing Afghan Taliban, that should continue, but also the efforts. Because I would come back to one last point. This senior Afghan official that I requested about a particular humanitarian effort or work, and in his words, even if it's for the good or betterment of the Taliban, unless you make ground by convincing his, because there is no concept of her, his means a minister or a governor, by his close circle of trusted friends, when these people are taken into confidence and when they have convinced the governor sahib or the minister sahib, only then would he see the benefit of those processes. So I think that should also be tried.
Right, fair enough. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a solution at this time. I mean, when we look at sanctions, like Dr. Soherwordi, I think one comment, quick comment from you, unfortunately we're running out of time. The sanctions also invariably seem to be targeting those girls, those women, those children that seem to be suffering the most. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. This is what is happening at the moment. But at the same time, the entire Afghan society, even the government itself, is suffering from that because of such strict policies vis-a-vis women. I also see that the Afghan Taliban at the moment, as Yousafzai just mentioned, I'm just giving it another word, that they are also divided into hardliners and softer ones, which means conservative and liberal Taliban. Liberal Taliban are still speaking against this ban on women education. They want women education institutions to be open, whereas hardliners are more stronger at the moment. I think that this is the high time that we must openly speak about. Once again.
And those hardliners seem to outweigh those that are more liberal. Unfortunately, on that note, thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Soherwordi, thank you for joining us today on this very important topic. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Sardar Masood Khan, thank you for being with us. Arshad Yousafzai, thank you for joining us. As we sit here today, there is global criticism of Taliban's anti-women policies. As we sit here today, there's banning girls' secondary and higher education, restricting women from most workplaces, eliminating their presence from public and political life. These actions significantly worsen the conditions for women, for girls, and for female-headed households. That said, when we sit here today, when we look at sanctions, even when they come from countries like Australia, they don't seem to be making a difference to those women, to those children, to those girls who are being restricted. In fact, they seem to be having quite the reverse effect. What then is the solution for those women, for those girls who are consistently marginalized like this and only getting worse every day? That should be a cause for global concern at this time. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.